All right, back at it. Start of the week. My name's Casey Wickstrom.com. You are at the Monday Mindfulness Meditation half hour. Always a pleasure. Um, Mindfulness and meditation are pretty simple, actually, when you get down to the fundamental premise of the practice. Pretty simple. The mind tends to complicate things. That's, in a way, its job. Likes to complicate things and then try to uncomplicate them. It's kind of what can turn into a vicious cycle, but only if it remains unconscious and we allow that unconsciously or otherwise to perpetuate in our day-to-day life. So mindfulness and meditation, oftentimes we think ourselves out of the practice because we think that it's too complicated or perhaps too spiritual or perhaps fill in the blank. But really, at a fundamental level, it's very, very simple. And what I like about Buddhist philosophy is that the main priority was to simplify everything. And that's why a lot of these things, or a lot of the principles are in numerical order. So the Buddha says here's the Noble Eightfold Path. There's 8 things. Or like, here's the 4 establishments of mindfulness. There's 4 things. And so it was very intentional about simplifying what could otherwise be perceived as a very complicated or like nuanced or just perhaps a subject that's really easy to misunderstand. And so I was taking a walk the other day and I was very in the moment. It was after meditation. And in English Lit, I'm an English Lit major. We often talk about lenses through which we can read different texts. And so if you get into like literary theory or literature criticism, we talk about lenses and we say, well, we can read this text through a post-colonial lens, or we can read this through a modern lens or a postmodern lens. And what it does is it changes the perception or the interpretation and the method of analysis with which we read a text. And it's cool because if you know what lens you're reading through, it completely changes everything. And we could use the same thing for mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply a lens. If you think of a camera lens, how most of the time, if it's out of focus, you really need to adjust. And sometimes it's just a very small, minute adjustment, and then everything becomes clear and it comes into sharp focus. And I mean that not just in a figurative sense, but when you were present, perhaps you've come out of a meditation before and you've noticed how colors are extra bright and things seem to be extra defined, like just a little bit sharper. Your focus is a little bit sharper. And so it's not just figuratively when I say that we're adjusting the lens. What we're really doing is changing the lens of our perception from mindlessness or unconscious autopilot to mindfulness, conscious awareness. And back to the subject of simplifying, I was walking and I was thinking of thoughts and I started to notice the thoughts. And last week I had said, this is my mind on anger. And I was referring to the 4 establishments of mindfulness. That's not how the Buddha phrases it. He doesn't say, this is your mind on anger. What it reminded me of, and it had just come out last week, but what it reminded me of is that commercial, this is your brain. And then they crack an egg and it's in a frying pan. It goes, this is your brain on drugs, that's kind of a dated reference. And that's even before my time, really. I grew up with Dare, but it was kind of the same thing. This is my brain on anger. It's like, oh, okay, well, this is the experience that I'm having when I'm angry. This is my brain on sadness. This is my brain. And then I started to simplify that. And I was thinking of, on the walk, just different thoughts. And I thought, this is my this is my mind in the past. And then I'd go along and I'd think of something else. And I'd say, this is my mind in the future. And then I'd say, this is my mind in the present moment. And I realized that there's only 3 places where your mind can be: the past, the future, or the present moment. Regardless of whether or not things have actually happened, we view events, past or future, conversations that we may or may not have had. We see that as either potentially happening in the future or already having happened, regardless of whether or not they've actually happened. As I mentioned before in an earlier meetup, your body doesn't know the difference between real or unreal. It doesn't know the difference between past, present, future. It gets messages from your brain and it lights up. And that's why when we think of things that have happened from the past or things that have not yet happened, the body responds. It gets that message and it thinks, whoa, okay, I'm in danger. My mind is in the past. My mind is in the future. My mind is in the present moment. And I started to get very, very centered in the present moment. I felt as though I was kind of balancing between past, present, and past, future, and the present. And um, when I started to practice that, just those three things, where's my mind? Is it in the past, the present, or the future? And whenever I realized it was in the past or the future, I was already present. Because as I've said before, the practice of mindfulness, you're either on or you're not. It's a switch, and it's either on or it's off. You're either mindful and you're aware of your surroundings, you're aware of what's going on in the present moment, or you're not. And the moment that you are aware that your mind is in the future, you are making that realization from the present moment, in the present moment. And with that realization, there's that shift in perspective. There's that change of a lens. There's that change of focus. And so when we sit down to meditate and we realize that our thoughts have gone astray, or maybe floated away, or we're caught up in an emotion, the moment we realize that, that unconscious link that ties us to that particular thought or that emotion is broken. We're free. We have untied ourselves because we realized that we're tied up. If you don't know you're tied up, it's going to be really hard to start to untie yourself. And in Buddhism, they talk about what's called semyojana. Don't ask me to spell it, but that means internal knots. And over time, through mindfulness, through awareness, through meditation, through deep looking, and through enough insight, we can start to undo these knots, many of which are unconscious and oftentimes generational. And so when I was walking, I'd say my mind is in the past right now. This is my mind in the past. This is my mind in the future. This is my mind in the present moment. And really saying this is my mind in the present moment was almost redundant, because by the time I had realized where my mind was, I was already in the present moment, but I felt that it kind of deepened my awareness of where I was and what I was doing. And I thought, well, that's pretty simple. That's probably about as simple as it gets. Where's your mind? Is it in the past, the present, or the future? Where's your mind? Because by the time you realize, oh, I'm thinking about the past, well, welcome back to the present moment. And if you think, oh, yeah, these thoughts are from the future, suddenly you realize that you're thinking. And that can be the greatest realization that a human can have, is that, oh, I'm thinking thoughts. It's not necessarily reality at all. I'm just noticing the process or the mechanism or the what it is to think. I'm just noticing the uh, the process of thoughts without getting tied up in these knots. This is going to be a little expositional, but I do think it's interesting. When I was asking myself, where's my mind? It reminded me of a song called Where's My Mind by a punk rock band called the Pixies. If you've seen the movie Fight Club, it's the end credits. The Pixies are a very influential punk rock band from the 90s. And probably their most popular song is Where Is My Mind? Now, I haven't heard that song since I saw the Pixies live in Santa Cruz years ago, and I hadn't heard that song since, and I hadn't really thought of it until the other day. Next day, I'm playing a gig in San Jose, and I was supposed to play for 3 hours. Instead, I just play for one, and they say, we'll pay you. You can just leave whenever. And I go, great, I'm going to do that. I end up going to a last minute yin class, which is a very passive, meditative style of yoga where we hold poses, very, very simplified, not to say easy, but very simplified compared to other practices. And in that yin class, on the soundtrack, because it was taught with music, there was a classical piano rendition of Where Is My Mind? And because you couldn't play the punk rock song in a yin class. I mean, you could, but then no one would come back and it would just be absolutely, so weird. But to have not heard that song for so long, to have brought it back into my attention by asking myself, where is my mind? Past, present, future. My mind is in the past. This is my mind on the future. This is my mind in the present moment. And then for the next day to hear that song in a very unlikely place, yin class, a class that I would not have even gone to, had the show not been canceled. I mean, is it a coincidence? Yeah, maybe, whatever. But honestly, that's pretty interesting to me, at least. And so that's where my mind's at. And I think the universe, I often say, like the algorithms of the universe, or the universe harmonizes with itself. Someone said either everything is a coincidence or nothing is. And that's kind of black and white to look at it. But I think that that's cool. And I invite you today to really take a very simplified approach to the practice, because ultimately, at a fundamental level, it is very simple. You're either here in the present moment or you're not. And guess what? You need both of those experiences. You can't be in the present moment all the time because your mind wanders. It's realizing where your mind is, bringing that attention gently back to the present moment. That's what creates that change of lens. That's what creates that shift in focus, that change of consciousness. That's what brings us out of mindlessness into mindfulness. And so for today, I invite you, notice your thoughts and notice, are they in the past? Are they in the future? And as soon as you notice that, the unconscious link to your thoughts and emotions are broken and you are back in the present moment. You've brought your attention back because you have become the observing presence, the witness. Um, and that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So find a comfortable seated position and we'll go ahead and get started. Relax. Spine is straight, long, shoulders melt away from your ears. Decide what you're going to do with your hands. Taking a few deep breaths to just get grounded, to come back to yourself. And as you breathe, simply noticing your breath as it comes and goes. You can say to yourself, this is my mind in the present moment. My mind is in the present moment. We start to notice where our attention is at any point in the day. And we start to notice our thoughts have drawn our attention into the past or the future. Every time we notice that, we recognize that we're breaking the unconscious condition of mind identification. And we can definitely go back and forth between slipping into unconscious and conscious awareness. But it can be a gentle back and forth, finding that balance. And then suddenly, our very thoughts have become meditation bells that bring us back to the center. Another way to visualize this is think of a sailboat on the ocean. You can't sail into the wind. In fact, if you're a boat in the ocean, you are at the mercy of the wind. However, a good sailor knows that by adjusting the sails, he can use the wind to coast and to get to where he needs to go. Essentially, we're doing the same thing with our thoughts, with our emotions. Just gently, but intentionally and mindfully guiding ourselves back into the present moment. Take a few deep breaths. And when you're ready, gently blink your eyes open. I feel like sometimes when we say that mindfulness is a discipline, that gives us a kind of mental image of being very strict and perhaps even forceful. And maybe in the beginning, that's a little bit more relevant, where we do want to adhere to a practice for consistency purposes. But the more we familiarize ourselves with the practice, I feel like the gentler we can get, until eventually it's just this very easy back and forth between past, present, future. And then we're spending more time in the past. We're spending more time in the present. We're not fighting against the past or fighting against the future. We're not fighting to be in the present moment. We're just naturally guiding the sails to where we are sailing free and easy in the present moment. Thanks for sharing your practice with me today. Always good to see you. My name's Casey.